I had a really enlightening moment yesterday and I wanted to share it with you. And I also wanted to add some therapy bits of things that might be helpful to people who might also be experiencing this. So, yesterday, I had a moment where my hyperfocus, one of my special interests, completely got in the way of my functioning. So my executive functioning became executive dysfunction almost immediately. I'm aware of this for myself, so I was able to manage it quite well. But then I went onto Facebook and I saw a comment that completely altered my perspective. And I thought I have to share this with my community of people because it is life changing. Somebody had posted in a Facebook group about autism that something that they was experiencing, that wasn't the bit that struck me. Somebody commented in the comment section, yes, but this happens to neurotypical people. And a guy replied and he put, yes, it does, but they can switch it on and off. And I was like, what? So again, as I do, I began to deep dive this. And I realized like this really is true because something that has always thrown me is that I know something that I did at university, for example, is we did configurations of self, which means that you may act different with your boss than you do with your mum, than you do with your best friend, etc. And that's quite a normal part of life. So I'm thinking, is that masking? And what I've come to realize is no, because they can switch it on and off. They can switch it on and off to benefit self. It doesn't interfere with their sense of self. It doesn't interfere with their identity at all. And they don't find it difficult to do so. And masking completely interferes with identity. It completely interferes with our relationship with self. And that is just one example of how we have a toggle difference. And I imagine like a little toggle on a gamepad where they can move their toggle very easily. But when we move our toggle, it's almost like we get stuck in that particular experience, and then it's very hard to move on to the next experience, and it takes a transition difference. And this is the focus of this video, which is how we have transition differences and how we need to start accommodating them and having a compassionate approach to that, because this will change your life if you begin to do so. So I'm going to tell you what experience I had yesterday that made me notice this. I have a lifelong interest in art. And I love doing art projects, but I am aware now that when I enter something that is a special interest and it becomes such a hyper focus, my executive function changes into executive dysfunction. And I have to be really mindful of that because it really does affect how I show up for myself, for my life, for my demands in life, my work, how it affects my ability to be able to complete tasks, do tasks, move on to and switch tasks, and just, adhere to and attend to parts of my life. So yesterday, I decided that I was going to do a Stranger Things project because me and my son are rewatching this series ready for the new launch of the new series. And we went back to the beginning and we're just rewatching it all the way through. And I'm like inspired. I'm like, I absolutely love this series. I really want to do an art project on it. And even in the moment where I've not even completed it yet, I've not even started it yet, I began to notice what my body was doing. And my body was like, oh, everything else can go on hold. And I was like, absolutely not. I'm busy at work at the moment. And I understand that for me personally, being a psychotherapist, my clients take the highest priority, and my children, obviously, but they take the highest priority because they absolutely need my undivided time and attention. And I realized how this could interfere with that. So I was like, right, I'm just going to have to park it because I'm going to have to be really mindful about how I start it, because the things that it would interfere with for me is my ability to be able to be completely present at work, because not by choice, my hyper focus, my special interest is like a magnet. It pulls me into this vortex that is all consuming. It's all I can think about. It's all that I am consumed by. So the moment that I enter that is what begins to happen. So I was like, right, I can't do this. I'm going to have to be really mindful about how I start it, how I consider transitions from it when I am, because it's going to take me at least a week, how I consider transitions from project into life, because I will abandon things with myself. Like I might forget to eat, I might forget to go to the toilet, I might even forget to take my nightly shower because I want to do my art project more. I might sleep less, which is a huge factor in terms of my own well-being. I might spend less time with my kids. I might forget that they've got homework that I need to attend to. My husband might get less of my time and my attention. You see how this affects my life. So for me, it's a huge thing that I need to be aware of. And if I don't have a compassionate approach to that, lots of things end up happening. So I thought I'm going to do a breakdown video of potentially how we can look at this, how we can address this, and how we can also be compassionate to self and add a transition plan so that you can manage your own and how it shows up for you in the most effective way possible. Because the other thing that we have to be mindful of is when these things do affect us, whatever it is for you, which we will go on to create in a list soon, our stuckness in that, if we're stuck on that toggle, if we've moved in any direction that took our focus or has made us have some sort of sensory experience, whatever it might be, we won't move to the next thing as easily. And again, we have to manage that because our sensitivity will increase, which will affect our ability to attend to life. And our stuckness has to be considered, because equally that will affect how we attend to our life. So these are the things that I would consider here is, what is my sensory load looking like right now whilst I'm completing a task that is taking my focus, and potentially I'm going to be met with a task switch, which would be all of our kind of executive functioning. So my sensory load, I would look at what support do I have in place? Is this solely down to me to manage and be mindful of, because I've maybe not expressed it or people don't know that I struggle with this, because I noticed yesterday when I was struggling with that, it was completely invisible to everybody. I knew what was going on for me. I knew how it was affecting me. I knew how it was affecting my capacity. But visibly, it wasn't visible to anybody to see. So the support that we have in place and how we might want to manage that, where we are at in terms of our burnout levels, it will 100% look different, like task switching and that sort of stuckness will almost magnify if we are in a more chronic burnout state. So we have to be mindful of that. Any co-occurring conditions. So say, for example, somebody has ADHD, co-occurring, an intellectual disability, a physical disability, we have to consider that because it will again magnify our ability to task switch and the stuckness and the sensitivity that we feel when we're having that experience. Our trauma history, because again, things like asking for support when maybe we become hyper independent, for example, because we're used to not being able to rely on other people, will also affect how we manage this and where we are at currently with our mental, emotional, physical, sensory overwhelm. So I want to give you some examples other than the one that I give you about my particular hyperfocus, because you might not be able to relate to that. So I want to give you some examples of how this might show up in your life. Say, for example, you are, I don't know, a parent maybe, and you are sat cooking tea and your focus is on that task at hand. And then there's a knock at the door and your kid is asking you a question. Most people would be like able to, like a neurotypical person might just be able to order that really easily, turn off the pan, say to the child 1 minute and go and answer the door. And when I say that, it's not causing them, it might cause them a bit of frustration, but it's not going to necessarily cause them a dysregulated state or a shutdown or an overwhelm or a chronic freeze in that moment. But when you struggle with task switching and it affects your executive functioning, this will look very different. It won't look like I have the ability to manage this. It will look like either I'm overwhelmed, I'm going to maybe overreact to this situation, or, and I say that with love, like I say that with sensitivity, understanding that you're not necessarily overreacting, but to the outside world, maybe that's the way that they might view that. Or more in terms of how it would show up for me is I would just be paralyzed, like frozen in that moment. And I would have to begin to almost try get my mind and get my body moving out of this treacle. And I would be like, what do I do? And it's because of the toggle. My toggle is stuck. So we have to be mindful about how we might manage those transitions. Another one might be socially. Say, for example, you have scheduled in some you time, very much needed you time. And you're like, okay, I'm just going to have a couple of hours to myself because I've got that. But then what if you get a phone call or a knock at the door? And for most people, this will, who's that? Go and answer it, and then be able to just return back to you time or the them time that they've scheduled. But for you, that might look like paralysis. Oh my God, why is somebody at the door? No, this is not what I'd planned. This is not what I wanted. I really needed this me time. And they're almost stuck in the state that they had first entered. And it's almost so hard to remove themselves and enter a new state. And they might not answer the phone, but they might be sat with this sort of pendingness of, now I have another unfinished task that kind of interferes with my ability to be alone and really recharge in the way that I thought I was going to. Another one where task switching and executive dysfunction might play a role in your life is emotional processing. So again, use this overlay for anything that feels like it applies to you. But say, for example, you're at work and you get a bit of feedback about the latest project that you've done. And it's not negative necessarily, it's just constructive. But most people are just like, I just need to change the layout of that. Okay, no worries. And they can just go away and do that. And anybody who struggles with many components here could be at play. It could be RSD. It could be decoding social information. So things like, right, what do I need to consider here? What are the implications of this? What is the tone of the person? Do they mean anything more than what they've said? Because I know that that's a rule that I don't know how to follow. I also need to consider the feedback, but I also need to consider how this is showing up in my body and all the emotions that are now swimming around. And because of that, you're stuck in that feedback space. And then the next part is really hard to transition onto because you are stuck. There's a few examples, but again, have a look at how this might be affecting you, and then we can move on to how we work with ourselves rather than against ourselves. So I'm going to give you a list of things that help. Firstly is communication. I know that this is not everybody's best friend. It absolutely could be. But if you are anything like the older me, people pleasing might come into play. Our formed relationship with attachment and love could interfere with our ability to be able to communicate. Even if we know how to communicate, actually being able to do it can be a bit of a sticking point. And what I would say with that is that you would have to work on your own relationship with your own attachment, your own wounds, and your own triggers. Happy to do a video on those sorts of things if needed, but on your people pleasing. But the first thing that I would say in relation to this that would absolutely help the situation get better is clear communication. And I'm going to give you some examples of that. The next thing would be is having a transition plan that is beneficial and created around your particular transitions and transition difficulties and how it affects your executive functioning. And the third one, which will always be integral to the teachings of what I do in therapy, is self-compassion. Nothing works without self-compassion. If you are bullying yourself, if that voice inside your head is cruel to you and it is telling you that you shouldn't be operating the way that you do, but you do, that is who you are, that is how you work, none of this will end up working. So I'm going to give you some examples of how we could communicate in clear, really clear, simple sentences, what might be going on for us. 1, I don't dip in and out of transitions easily. Please just bear with me. I promise you, I'm not being rude. I'm just stuck in another state. It might take me a little bit longer, but I will get there. Number 3, when my environment or my emotions change quickly, it takes my nervous system a little while to catch up. It's neurological, it's not personal. Number 4, I'm not resistant to change. I just might need more preparation so that I can transition safely and so that my nervous system doesn't get dysregulated. And I'm going to tell you why self-compassion is so important, because without it, I can promise you, you will experience lots of things that you know you will have experienced, but you might not have put down to your relationship with yourself. Without it, you will experience chronic shame and guilt, masking fatigue, self-doubt, emotional burnout, collapses after small stresses because of the build-up that is in your body, internalized ableism, a disconnection from your true self and your true needs. And what happens when you have it? When you're able to have a better, trusting, compassionate, kind, inclusive relationship with yourself, you're able to regulate faster, come out of shutdowns faster or meltdowns, prevent burnout, build trust with yourself and with your nervous system, have smoother transitions, even if you have and do experience stuckness. You will reduce the shame and the guilt that you feel in your body. And you will stop performing and you will actually start to feel like you're living again. Some things that we can do to help with our self-compassion is we can begin to narrate without judgment. So that would literally be like a narrator on a program. Like I can notice right now that Jade, for example, when I was feeling this yesterday, is feeling a sense of stuckness. She is beginning to feel the creeping of executive dysfunction because she is in a hyperfocus state and wanting to enter that state, but is aware that might affect other areas of her life. When we do this, we remove the judgment that is almost probably automatically going on when we have that kind of inner bully in our head, and we begin to see it for what it is. And then when we can see it and we're aware of it, we can begin to approach it correctly because we understand it for what it is. And we begin to work with it rather than against it. So what I might notice is if I enter that state and I'm aware that that's going to affect me and I don't want it to affect all those areas of life, I'm going to have to create pockets of window with soft transitions so that I am able to enter that state but also not lose other areas of my life. And that will work for me. But we can only get there if we have compassion and awareness before we create the plan. Another thing, it might sound counterintuitive, but to add more compassion to your life, slow down so we can dial up the awareness and not bully ourselves into doing something so fast that we've missed a lot of the transition and how it's affected us. Number 3, give yourself permission to pause. We're not in a race. We don't need to do anything instantly. We're not a computer. We're humans. And life used to be so much slower and it's getting faster, and we don't and shouldn't increase our speed with that, because that is how we get illness. That's how we get dysregulated. That is how we get burnt out. In fact, give yourself moments to pause and reflect and this might be harder for somebody with ADHD, but give yourself moments, even if it's very small pockets of windows of time where there is no expectation on you. And number 4, validate small difficulties. They happen to all of us. Even the people that you think are absolutely amazing, they will have difficulties, but their relationship with their difficulties and their self as a byproduct of their difficulties is the game changer. And number 5, which is so important, let's focus less on resilience and more on regulation. If your focus is truly on that, your nervous system is going to begin to feel different, your mind is going to begin to feel different, and you're going to be able to approach these things differently. And naturally, what will happen is resistance will become less, acceptance will become more. And when I say that is true internal freedom, I can't describe it in a way that would do any justice, but it is. And the last bit, the transition plan. Firstly, you have to identify your own major transition issues. So for mine, hyperfocus and how that leads to executive dysfunction is a big one for me. Another one might be if something really big happens in my life, it really kind of almost pulls me into a very negative vortex, vacuum almost, a very negative, all-consuming one. And that would be another one that I would have to focus on. But for anybody else, it could be things that are big, but also it could be things that are small, transitioning from wake to active, getting ready. It could be transitioning from work time into home time or vice versa. It could be social time from quiet time. It could be anything. Identify at least 3 of your transitions that you might want to just explore and focus on. Number 2, create a transition ritual. This would look something like what I said about it first takes your awareness of it and how it affects you. So again, maybe just the narrator part where you're starting to notice how it's affecting you from a really non-judgmental space, and then beginning to add things that help that particular thing. So with social time, it could be, do you know what? The noise, the sensory environment is actually so much for me that I can't enjoy it even though I do enjoy it. Okay, because you enjoy the company of those people. Loop headphones would become part of the ritual of that transition from alone time into social time, because I can still hear, it still lets in sound, but I am going to add this into my ritual of self-care where I know that it will absolutely stop my container being full and me then becoming dysregulated and then me shaming myself for having a spillover because my nervous system can't take this. Number 3, protect your transition window. If your toggle gets stuck, your toggle gets stuck. You're not flawed. You're not broken. It's just a neurological difference. There's nothing wrong with that. It is just the way that you operate. In some ways, it could be really beneficial, because when I say the hyperfocus and the special interests of the autistic people I know, at least, are so enlightening because they're so consuming. But sometimes it can hinder life, and that's okay. We don't need to bully ourselves. And actually, we can have a very fulfilled life. We can have a very good relationship with ourselves when we become accepting of that and we adhere to that. So protect the transition window, which basically means things like don't put something back to back if you know you've got a couple of transitions that are going to affect how you feel, your nervous system, and your executive functioning. Another one could be don't have neurotypical expectations of yourself. Another one could be giving yourself time when you know transitions are going to be required. Number 4, I feel like it goes without saying, but I will say it anyway. Make it autism friendly. Make it you friendly. Don't make it how you think somebody else would thrive in it or should have it or what it should look like based off everything that everyone tells you, including me. Make it you friendly. And if you are able to apply all these things, I promise you, life will begin to change. Executive functioning will begin to be able to blossom a little differently. Transitions will be less difficult because less shame will be sprinkled in there. And your relationship with yourself as a byproduct will begin to blossom in the most beautiful way. I hope this has been helpful. I hope that it helps at least one person who watches this all the way through. Please let me know what transitions you struggle with. And can anybody relate to struggling with the hyperfocus becoming something that becomes debilitating in terms of my executive functioning becoming dysfunctioning? Speak soon.